Every year, it seems the conversation about whether or not John McTiernan's 1988 action classic Die Hard is a holiday film grows louder and louder. While I am of the opinion that a film set around the winter solstice featuring any manner of narrative or visual indication of the seasonal festivities counts as appropriate Yuletide entertainment, I've grown tired of this discourse surrounding what is admittedly one of the greatest action films of all time. However, one added benefit to this cultural dialogue is the reassessment of other films as perhaps belonging to this once stringently exclusive genre. Movies like Lethal Weapon, Batman Returns, Eyes Wide Shut, and even The Princess Bride have been reevaluated in the wake of the Die Hard discussion. And I'm all for it. Anything that can provide a seasonally apropos palate cleanser amidst a class of film that often veers into saccharine and overly sentimental territory earns itself a welcome spot in my December rotation. But how well does this new view on unconventional holiday flicks extend to game adaptations of said movies? Folks looking for an interactive entertainment option that also reflects the festive season have limited choices. It's certainly a tougher proposition than popping on any old horror game during Halloween. So, in this episode, we'll be taking a look at a game based on not one, but the first 3 Die Hard films, 2 of which are set on Christmas Eve. This is Die Hard Trilogy. In 1966, novelist Roderick Thorpe saw the publication of his sophomore effort, The Detective, that would, unbeknownst to him at the time, give birth to one of the most well-known characters in all of crime fiction. The book follows private detective Joe Leland as he investigates a complex murder-suicide case. Having worked at his father's detective agency, Thorpe wrote the novel from a place of experience. The gritty thriller billed as an adult look at police life was adapted into a film of the same name in 1968, starring crooner Frank Sinatra as Joe Leland. The film tells a similar story as the book, shuffling key plot revelations and putting a stronger emphasis on then taboo themes of homosexuality and infidelity present in the narrative. The film did well at the box office, and critics praised Sinatra's committed performance. But despite its success, Thorpe allowed the character of Joe Leland to rest for more than 10 years until seeing John Guillermin's seminal disaster film, The Towering Inferno, in 1975. The movie, about a group of characters who attempt to survive in a burning skyscraper, inspired a dream in which Thorpe saw a man being chased through a building by gunmen. Taking this idea, Thorpe wrote and released a follow-up to The Detective in 1979 called Nothing Lasts Forever. In this more action-oriented sequel, the now-retired Joe Leland is visiting the headquarters of the Klaxon Oil Corporation, a 40-story office building where his daughter, Stephanie Gennaro, works. The story takes place on Christmas Eve during a company holiday party, when a group of German radicals attack the building led by Anton Little Tony the Red Gruber. In an attempt to rescue his daughter and grandchildren who are also present at the party, Leland eliminates 12 Germans, including Gruber, who falls to his death alongside Leland's daughter, Stephanie. Following the success of The Detective, the movie rights for Nothing Lasts Forever were scooped up by 20th Century Fox before the book was even written. Having wanted to start development on the project for several years, producer Lloyd Levin gave struggling screenwriter Jeb Stewart the opportunity to work on the adaptation. Stewart wrestled with the treatment, frequently turning in 18-hour workdays with little to show for it by the time he went home at night to a house already full of strife due to his strained mental state. And then, a car crash and near-death experience made Stewart realize what was most important in life. He went home and made up with his wife, and thus found the emotional center of his script, the reconciliation of a failing relationship. After turning in his draft, tried and true screenwriter Steven D'Souza was brought on to punch up the screenplay. D'Souza's work on films such as 48 Hours, Commando, and The Running Man made him a natural choice to inject some comedy into a script that was, at that point, much truer to the dour, realistic tone of Thorpe's novel. Initially, casting the film was a matter of course. Sinatra, having portrayed Joe Leland in the previous adaptation of Thorpe's work, was contractually obligated to receive an offer for the role. The Rat Packer was 70 years old at the time and ultimately turned it down. The hunt was then on to find the gruff, world-weary protagonist to fill Sinatra's shoes. Offers were sent to such 80s action stalwarts as Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, and Harrison Ford. The man who eventually got the part was by no means the studio's first choice. Bruce Willis was mostly known for his work on the television romantic comedy Moonlighting, and had only starred in one film, 1987's Blind Date. Believe it or not, he was even more recognized as a musical artist than as a movie star at the time. As far as action roles go, he was certainly untested, but after failing to nab such bankable stars as Clint Eastwood or Mel Gibson, Willis got the chance to show the world his worth as he stepped into the role of John McClane, a younger take on Thorpe's Joe Leland and the first of several changes Nothing Lasts Forever would see in its transition to the silver screen. Willis handpicked actress Bonnie Bedelia to portray his estranged wife Holly Gennaro, changing the character from Leland's daughter in the novel. Secondary and tertiary roles would go to actors such as the reliably typecast Reginald Vell Johnson as Sergeant Al Powell and Hart Bochner as the unscrupulous Harry Ellis, following in the footsteps of his father Lloyd Bochner, who played Dr. Wendell Roberts in The Detective. And finally, the role of Hans Gruber, changed from Anton Gruber in the book, went to theater actor Alan Rickman, who would enjoy his feature film debut with the part. Taking the reins as director was John McTiernan, who had proven himself the year prior with the successful Arnold Schwarzenegger vehicle, Predator. And on July 22, 1988, Die Hard hit theaters across the US. Much like Thorpe's book, the movie tells the story of a lone police officer facing a group of armed assailants in a high-rise building on Christmas Eve. The American Klaxon Oil Company is now the Nakatomi Corporation, reflecting the proliferation of Japanese companies in the US throughout the 1980s. New York City police officer John McClane has been invited to attend his estranged wife's company holiday party in Los Angeles. While there, a group of apparent terrorists led by a man named Hans Gruber enter the building and take the partygoers as hostages. During the initial commotion, McClane manages to slip away. He soon learns that the gunmen are not, in fact, terrorists, but rather thieves who are after $640 million worth of untraceable bearer bonds. Eventually, the Los Angeles police get involved and maintain contact with Gruber. Meanwhile, McClane sneaks through the building, dispatching bad guys while communicating with a single LA cop, Sergeant Al Powell. Battered and bruised from his numerous brushes with death, McClane finally confronts Gruber, who has the cop's wife, Holly, at gunpoint. Like in Thorpe's novel, McClane tapes a gun to his back and pretends to surrender before unleashing a surprise attack on the thief. Gruber falls to his death and, unlike the book, McClane's loved one is saved. The film was considered a massive success, earning $140 million on a budget of less than $40 million. It defied expectations, outperforming the Schwarzenegger vehicle Red Heat that summer, and made Willis a movie star overnight. So, of course, there were sequels. June 29, 1990 saw the return of John McClane in Die Hard 2, but this time under the direction of Rennie Harlin. Having reconciled with his wife Holly in the previous film, the police officer has quit his job with the NYPD and moved to LA, where he works alongside Sergeant Powell, once again played by Reginald Vell Johnson. McClane is waiting at Washington Dulles Airport in D.C. for his wife's plane to arrive when a group of terrorists disables air traffic control's ability to land aircraft, leaving Holly stuck in the sky. The radicals are led by former U.S. Special Forces Colonel William Stewart, played by William Sadler, who is attempting to intercept and rescue General Ramon Esperanza, a South American dictator played by Italian actor Franco Nero, who is being extradited to the United States. With the help of a janitor named Marvin, McClane fights back against Stewart and his followers, eventually confronting the colonel on the wing of the mercenaries' escape plane. McClane is knocked off the aircraft but removes the fuel hatch, creating a trail of flammable liquid that the cop ignites, exploding the plane as it takes off and killing Stewart, Esperanza, and the bad guys on board. The airplanes circling the airport use the fire trail on the runway to guide them to a safe landing, and McClane is reunited with his wife. The sequel was another home run for 20th Century Fox, raking in $240 million on a budget of less than $70 million. And 5 years later, John McClane would once again return, along with director John McTiernan, in 1995's Die Hard with a Vengeance. Although originally written as a standalone film called Simon Says, the script was repurposed as a Die Hard entry, this time placing the action in McClane's home of New York City and setting the story for the first time during the summer instead of on Christmas Eve. The movie begins with the bombing of a New York City department store, after which the police receive a phone call from a man calling himself Simon, taking credit for it. He demands that the suspended Lieutenant John McClane stand on a street corner in Harlem wearing a sign containing a racial slur or another bomb will go off. There, McClane meets Zeus, played by Samuel L. Jackson, who helps him escape when confronted by a group of young men who take offense to the sign. Simon then sends McClane and his reluctant partner all over the city solving riddles. While the police are preoccupied, Simon and his team dig into the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and steal $140 billion worth of gold bullion. It is revealed that Simon, played by Jeremy Irons, is actually the brother of Hans Gruber, who McClane killed years earlier at Nakatomi Tower in Los Angeles. He claims his plan is to destroy the gold, thus collapsing the economies of several Western countries. But just like his brother, these stated political aims are merely a misdirection for a simple theft. McClane tracks down Simon and his men at a warehouse near the US-Canada border where the thief's men are captured, and McClane destroys Gruber's helicopter as he attempts to escape. The film ends with Zeus convincing John to call his wife, with whom he has once again become estranged. Again, the Die Hard name proved its power at the box office, racking up $366 million on a budget of $90 million. Personally, I still find the original film to be the best of the bunch, but I have plenty of love for the first two sequels. After that though, well, let's not talk about it. The franchise's success gave birth to a number of video games, starting in 1989 with the release of Die Hard for the MS-DOS platform. The following year would see iterations of the original film on the Commodore 64 and TurboGrafx-16. 1991 saw an NES version come out for Nintendo's 8-bit platform. The sequel film also received the interactive treatment on various computer systems in 1991, but then 5 years later, two games would be released that to this day are widely considered the two best entries in the Die Hard franchise. Die Hard Arcade, developed by Sega, is a 3D beat-em-up. It was released in Japan as Dynamite Decca for licensing reasons, although I find it strange that they were still able to use Bruce Willis's likeness on the cover art, something that the version actually using the Die Hard name did not. And finally, also released in 1996, is the subject of this video, Die Hard Trilogy for PlayStation, PC, and Sega Saturn. Today, we'll be looking at the PlayStation version. Developed by UK-based studio Probe Entertainment, Die Hard Trilogy presents the player with the option to play the game version of any of the first three Die Hard films in whichever order they please. So in the spirit of this kind of freedom, and as a strong believer in saving the best for last, I've decided to mix things up. I'm going to talk about each game mode in order from my least to most favorite, starting with the third film's adaptation, Die Hard with a Vengeance. This mode presents as a driving game in which the player uses a variety of vehicles to search for bombs scattered across the city within a limited time, a simple concept that is true enough to its source. Following on-screen prompts and audio hints from Zeus, who is along for the ride, the player must disable a number of explosives per level, some of which are stationary and others aboard moving vehicles which must be chased and rammed into several times. A number of icons spread throughout the stages will aid the player in several ways, including adding time to the ever-ticking countdown clock, giving the car a turbo boost, or even launching the vehicle over police blockades. The horn is also useful for clearing pedestrians out of the street, otherwise they will slow your progress. The player will visit locations from the film such as Harlem, Central Park, and Chinatown from a third or first-person perspective, which features a gory little Easter egg. The game also boasts a cinematic camera like the Grand Theft Auto series would introduce starting with GTA 3 in 2001. After 12 levels of driving action, the player finally faces Simon Gruber at the ship docks. Using launch pickups to rocket your vehicle into Gruber's helicopter, the player finally defeats the villain. Of the three games contained in Die Hard Trilogy, I had the least fun with this one. Although vehicles can be swapped out mid-game by pulling into a parking lot, the clock is always ticking and it never feels like you have enough time to get a new car that might be better for the current mission. The controls are extremely touchy and anything less than a perfect run frequently feels inadequate to complete the current bomb search. It's not a terrible game, just a bit too difficult for its own good, and I prefer this style of gameplay in something like Twisted Metal. Up next is the game mode based on the first film, Die Hard. This selection will have the player take control of John McClane in a third-person perspective as he clears floor after floor of baddies with a variety of weapons. The number of enemies currently on the map is displayed in the top right corner and will usually jump up at least once per stage as reinforcements arrive. McClane must also attempt to rescue hostages, earning points for both freeing the captives and seeing them safely find an exit. After clearing a floor of bad guys, a 30-second countdown will begin, indicating a bomb has arrived on one of the elevators, which the player must locate to disarm it and complete the level. The player character's health is displayed in the top left of the screen as a badge that gets chipped away as McClane takes damage. Health can be recovered by picking up a variety of foodstuffs or first aid kits, and McClane's toughness can even be fortified with a bulletproof vest. Items like these can be found in crates and supply drops that occasionally come out of elevators. These may also contain grenades or even more powerful firearms such as shotguns and automatic weapons that will temporarily replace your pistol until they run out of ammo. The player's default sidearm never runs out of bullets but must be reloaded every 15 rounds. With a mini-map to guide him, McClane will clear 19 floors of the so-called terrorists, including visits to office spaces, maintenance areas, and even bonus levels on the roof where you must see hostages safely to an escape helicopter, much like the famous rooftop scene in the film. Several levels feature slightly tougher enemies indicated as bosses, but the game ends rather abruptly after the final stage, and an ultimate encounter with Hans Gruber is unfortunately never recreated from the film. Even though this one suffers a bit from clumsy controls that I can blame on it still being early in 3D gaming, I had a good deal of fun with this one. Breakable glass and collapsible walls give the levels themselves some welcome interactivity that reflects the chaotic action seen in the film. The arcade-style gameplay gets a bit repetitive by the end, but the variety of locations and weapon types, as well as a very decent Bruce Willis impersonation, keep this one interesting enough until the finale.
Get the hell out of here!
And finally, we come to Die Hard 2, an arcade-style on-rail shooter that's compatible with not only the standard PlayStation controller, but also the mouse accessory, and yes, the Konami light gun, which is obviously the ideal way to play this kind of game. Using a number of ballistic, incendiary, and explosive weapons, the player will make their way through Washington Dulles Airport, mowing down terrorists and trying their best not to hit civilians. Just like in the previously discussed Die Hard game mode, McClane's default weapon will never run dry, but must be reloaded. Pickups such as soda cans and medical kits will heal an injured McClane, as indicated by a number of badges in the lower left of the screen. A temporary shield can also be acquired. Red and blue target circles indicate enemies in the player's view and who is currently targeting McClane. With only 8 stages, Die Hard 2 is the shortest of the 3 games, but the player will get to experience not only the airport location, but also the church where Stewart's men have established their hideout in the film, including a snowmobile chase like in the movie. The ending differs from the film in that McClane boards a helicopter to chase down Stewart's plane mid-flight, shooting down numerous other choppers before destroying the jet's engines. For my money, Die Hard 2 is the best game of the bunch, and worth the price of admission alone, although the idea of 3 games in one is a notable value proposition in its own right. Not only is it the best looking of the 3 thanks to the limited perspective of the on-rails level progression, but it also feels like the best representation of the genre it's attempting. While I've played better driving games and third-person shooters than Die Hard with a Vengeance and Die Hard respectively, I feel that Die Hard 2 is just about as good as any light gun game I've touched, and it certainly stands up to its genre cousins on the PlayStation platform. I even think the music is better here. While Die Hard featured frenetic and eventually tiresome techno tracks, and With a Vengeance went with a more rock-oriented soundtrack that isn't bad in and of itself, the cool synthy sounds of Die Hard 2's score make it the one to beat. And as far as holiday games go, Die Hard 2 also takes the prize for most festive. While Die Hard features a couple of references to the season in McClane's one-liners, and With a Vengeance isn't even set in wintertime, Die Hard 2 sports the most Christmassy background elements by far, and the snowy levels don't hurt the vibe either. I think by now we all have our own opinions about whether Die Hard is a holiday movie. I think it is. You might not, and that's okay. But let's stop talking about it, because there's a much more interesting conversation to be had about the film, and that's whether or not it's a sequel. Well, that's a wrap on Die Hard Trilogy for the Sony PlayStation, a triple threat of arcade-style action that admittedly offers less than its film counterparts overall in the way of Yuletide theming. Still, it's plenty of fun and has lots of variety, and gets a recommendation from me. And as far as Christmas movie tie-ins go, it could be worse. A lot worse. But how about we save that for next Christmas? We all know there's only one way to end this episode. So until next year, yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.